Thank you for joining me for my second video in my series. This one is titled, Saying Goodbye to Ego, or Moving Beyond the Egoic Mind. This video's purpose is to help you detach your true self from the ego. While listening to my voice, remember that you are not your mind, thoughts, or even actions. To first understand how to move past or beyond an obstacle, you must first understand what the obstacle is. Without first understanding what is blocking your spiritual path, you won't be able to see where the path leads to, and will remain in spiritual stagnation. One of the greatest blockages to your progression down the path of spiritual enlightenment is your ego. Once your ego has been removed, or at least greatly diminished, the path becomes much more recognizable and easier to journey up. Notice I mention the word easier. The path to spiritual enlightenment, while not the easiest path, is by far the most rewarding. Think about all of the things in this life that lift you up and bring you the most happiness. Have you had to work hard for them? Or have they come easily to you? Have you given any of yourself, time, efforts to this person, place, or thing? What does the word ego mean? Well, the ego has been defined as the part of the mind that mediates between conscious and the unconscious and is responsible for reality testing and a sense of personal identity. Now, by this very definition, it sounds as if the ego is responsible for creating your sense of reality and personal identity. Now, in a more metaphysical sense, the ego is a conscious thinking subject. Now, I argue that the ego is anything but conscious or aware. I personally believe that the ego is blind to things that are spiritual in nature. This is why it's virtually impossible to mature spiritually if you have a strong sense of ego. This is why it is vital to move beyond the ego, or in the least diminish it, to where you can continue down your path to spiritual enlightenment. Once your ego has been reduced from a mountain down to a large boulder or even pebbles along your spiritual path, you will notice that the path is much easier to traverse. Now, the way that I personally view the concept of ego is quite simply stated as the physical mind, or the process of thinking unconsciously. Now, what is it that I mean by thinking unconsciously? I realize that can be a strange phrase for many of you, and one way to look at it is that most of our time is spent thinking unconsciously. This means that you, your spiritual self, are not in control. Now, please consider this. How often do you control your thoughts? Do you experience random thoughts? Is there any structure to your thoughts? I would argue that for most people, that their thoughts control them. If you are truly conscious or aware, would you allow your ego to control you? Now, I imagine that most of you would not consciously allow your egoic mind to control you. This is being done unconsciously. And as a result, you may not be aware that your mind is in control of you for the majority of your life up to now. Now, your physical mind was never designed to be used in this manner. The physical mind is indeed a miraculous tool. The ego should not be used unconsciously. When it is used in an unconscious manner, then all sorts of unfortunate things happen. For an example, just simply look at the state of the world today. Look at all of the wars, famine, pestilence, tribulations, suffering, heartache. Have you ever heard someone say that many of the people in positions of power are egomaniacs? Think about that. The people running the world today in positions of power are egomaniacs, and look at the state of the world. I believe this to be the case, but you'll need to determine that for yourself. Now that is essentially your proof as to what happens when your ego is allowed to run wild and unchecked. Now, moving beyond the ego is an attempt to move away from thinking in an unconscious manner to thinking in a more aware manner. Now, my goal during this video series is to help you move beyond the ego and embrace the no mind. I understand that this concept is difficult for most people to wrap your soul mind around. Yes, I did say wrap your soul mind around it. While the physical mind is a tool used for solving problems, the soul mind should be what is used for a majority of the time. The physical mind has been allowed to run almost every aspect of your life. Your mind doesn't want to think about a concept like living without ego, because it realizes that it will guide you down the path in which you will no longer rely on your physical mind as much. This can be quite terrifying to the ego. This would result in a form of death of the ego. Just as many of you fear death, the ego is no exception, and as a result, your mind chooses to not consider concepts that take away power or control away from it, and certainly it does not want to die. Now you can think of this as a self-preservation mechanism built into the egoic mind. Now, how do you move away from the egoic mind, you might ask? It is quite easy once you know how. It can be difficult to live in a constant state of no mind, in a world that expects you to be mostly controlled by your ego. I'm here to tell you that it can be done, and is well worth the effort. And once you learn how, it does become easier with practice, similar to when you learned how to walk, or ride a bicycle, or even drive a car. At first the concept seemed daunting. Then the more you practiced, the easier it was. Now you can walk, bike, or drive with hardly giving it any thought. This concept is the same. Please watch my next video in this series. In the next video, I will talk about a step-by-step process to help you quiet and ultimately remove the egoic mind. And as always, know that you are greatly loved and that I love you too.